Cyberpunk 2077 tells the story of V, but it also tells the story of Johnny Silverhand, how his rise to fame made him stand against the corporations, and how he almost took down Arasaka. But what we see of Johnny's memories isn't accurate. 2077's biggest and most subtle reveal is that Johnny is lying, not in malice or even intentionally, but because his engram and his mind are both damaged.
What you saw was his subjective view of what happened, a warped account of events he locked away in his subconscious and replayed time and again. It bears no resemblance to the truth.
Johnny is a man who has been reliving these events, replaying in his mind over and over again. So, what really happened? And who is the real Johnny Silverhand? To paint a better picture of who Johnny was, we must first look at his entire life, where he came from and what he experienced, and how that shaped him to become the man that we meet. So, who is Johnny Silverhand? Born Robert John Linder, Johnny was born in College Station, Texas on November 16, 1988. He grew up in a troubled home, neglected as a child. At the age of 4, his father sold him off for a pack of cigarettes, leaving Johnny to fend for himself. For fun, after shootouts, he'd race to collect any bullet casings he could find and trade them with other children. He struggled and suffered even at a young age. Eventually, he would find his way with a group of nomads that would take him in. His time with the nomads would be filled with violence and would shape him in his younger years. Not much else is known about his time with them, but his interest in music would begin when he was really young, becoming a major fan of Wendy O. Williams. Wendy was the lead singer of the Plasmatics before she went on to begin her solo career. She lived a little bit of a crazy lifestyle, which Johnny would go on to mirror in his own life quite a bit. When he was 9, Wendy killed herself, and Johnny was heavily impacted by this. He seemed to admire it. To him, she was the toughest ass rocker girl ever, and someone that Johnny aspired to be like. Most of his childhood is still a mystery, but at some point he learned how to speak a little bit of Japanese, being able to cuss in Japanese at least. But with not much of a foundation to the start of Johnny's life, he would go on to enlist in the military as a teenager, lying about his real age, with no one really looking into it. In 2003, when Johnny was just 15, he would be sent straight to war, fighting in Nicaragua in the Second Central American War. He was a U.S. Marine, a cyber grunt. Here, he'd eat military-made mac and cheese, and he absolutely hated it. But aside from the bad food, Johnny's experience in the war would be very hard on him, and it would change him entirely, radicalizing Johnny to see the truth. Seeing the mass casualties and devastation, and most likely being experimented on like his comrades, Johnny couldn't continue participating in the war. At this point, he knew how manipulative and corrupt the military was. They used and discarded people, and Johnny wasn't going to be one of them. The truth of the war was also being revealed to the public, being touted as a war on drugs. The truth of it being a land grab occupation was upsetting to the American people. The war was losing popularity, as was the Gang of Four who had been ruining the economy to fund it. After 8 years, it was a failure, and eventually the US surrendered. Soldiers and contracted soldiers overseas would be abandoned and left to find their own way home. But Johnny would get out way before then, deserting his military position, which he wasn't proud of. Alongside being radicalized against the government, the things he saw and the things he did also changed him mentally. On top of this, he suffered major physical injuries, losing his arm. He was also one of the first to get combat implants installed, having transparent Kuroshi eyes, his trademark silver arm, his interface, and the software chips installed during his time here. After this, he'd become temperamental and a bit cold. His new implants most likely caused Johnny to be one of the earliest cyber psychos. Johnny's mental state would be forever changed by his time at war, and with his new chrome, he would lose a little bit of humanity. Ironically, his arm was also made by Arasaka, and at some point he'd scratched off most of the Arasaka logo. But Johnny would not be the only one to abandon his post after the truth of the war was revealed. Many would desert following the reveal of the government's real motives. And in retaliation, the government would try to destroy the deserters, launching a propaganda campaign against them, convincing the American public to turn against the deserters. Having nowhere to go, Johnny would head to Night City, where he'd stay at Hotel Pistis Sophia for the first month. Here, he'd spend his time contemplating his life and where he was going next. When he was ready to leave, he would emerge different and begin his life as Johnny Silverhand, choosing his nickname from his silver arm. He'd also go on to wear the tags of the man who saved his life during the war, sacrificing his own to save Johnny. The name on the tags would be his own, Robert John Linder. Robert John Linder died so that Johnny Silverhand could be born. This new Johnny was about rebellion, chaos, and exposing corruption. He would emerge wanting to destroy Arasaka and the corporations that were destroying people's lives. This new Johnny Silverhand had declared war against the system, and he'd use his music to do so. Later that year in 2003, he would go on to start the band Samurai. Samurai was originally founded by Johnny and Carrie. Nancy Hartley would join them as their keyboardist, previously being a kicker for a local booster gang before joining them. She would be the one to name the band Samurai, after the warriors who were willing to die for their cause no matter what. But Nancy thought that kind of blind loyalty was stupid. So she took the name Samurai and turned it to have a street meaning, as a form of mockery. Johnny and Carrie thought it sounded cool, and thus, Samurai was born. After Nancy, Denny would also join Samurai as their drummer, and Henry would then join as their bassist. The small band would get its start with their first gig at the Red Dirt Bar, which would later go on to name one of their dishes the Samurai Ribs in honor of being Samurai's first gig. Back then, they were just a backstreet band, playing in various bars such as the Palladium, Destiny, or Nexus around Night City. They played in every bar that they could get into. And while they started out small, their rise to fame was very quick. Shortly after the band had been formed in 2003, they played a show at the Rainbow Cadenza, and here they'd be approached by someone wanting to sign them. The man was enamored by the band and wanted to book them immediately, and they just didn't believe him. They thought he was doped out, unaware of what he just offered them. So Denny got ready to beat the shit out of the guy with a chair for messing with them. Quickly, he tossed his card on the table, proving that he was serious. He was none other than Jack Masters of Universal Music. Within 3 weeks, they were signed, racing a record through production, and getting ready to tour every major city in the world. It took only 3 weeks for their song Blistering Love to hit the top of the charts. Their very first single from an unknown band to the top of the Eurocharts in 3 weeks was unheard of. Their first album would be released 2 weeks after this, and it would be one of the few times a debut album would achieve so much in such a short time. They were a hit. They sold out major venues like Wembley Stadium, and Samurai became a household name. They'd go on to tour all around the world and release 6 albums. 3 albums were studio work, and 3 were live recordings of concerts and jam sessions. They were in high demand. With this, they also knew they'd acquired power and a platform. And Johnny knew from the beginning where he wanted to take Samurai. Being anti-corporation was always the plan. Johnny also hated having managers, and seemed to butt heads with them, which probably prevented Samurai from achieving more. Their gigs were inconsistent. One day you couldn't even get in because they were so packed. And the next, you'd walk out right next to a whacked out Johnny, puking in the river. And Johnny loved the freedom and chaos of that. They once played an impromptu Samurai concert at the N-Cart subway stairwell, recorded by superfan Kareem. He recorded them as they performed Chippin' In amongst the hectic crowds. The band was a chaotic mess. They played in run-down, rat-infested dumps, rarely played sober, and argued before every show. And despite making plenty of money, They didn't have a single Eddie to their name. Carrie was also known to steal Johnny's pants. With their fame and chaotic lifestyle, rumors about the band also circulated. One rumor was that Johnny was sleeping with Henry to keep him in the band. Another rumor was that he was sleeping with Carrie, even though Johnny says it never happened. Johnny is bisexual and did swing both ways, but has a preference for women, saying the more the merrier. At this point, Johnny could have had anyone that he wanted, and was known for sleeping around, even though his heart wasn't really in it. Johnny's ego was growing, and unsurprisingly, Johnny never really seemed to be one to share his stage. Carrie said he left Samurai no less than 2 separate times, promising that each time would be his last. So there was tension, and maybe not enough room for the two to share the fame. The truth about Carrie and Johnny's relationship during their time in Samurai is mostly muddled. Even still, Carrie continued to put up with Johnny, and let him stay at the forefront of Samurai. On top of this, he also granted full authorship over the band's songs. It was Johnny's way or the highway, and Carrie seemed okay letting it be that way. The band was very successful in their short time, until 2007 when Samurai would fall apart. Nancy had been dating a man that she would go on to marry, and unknowingly to the band, he had been abusing her. It took the members 10 weeks after her wedding to realize what he had been doing to Nancy. He was abusing her and trying to control her. After her husband tried to force her to quit the band, she finally told the other members. This enraged them, and Johnny and Carrie went to her house to kick her husband's ass. But when they arrived, she'd already finished the job. Nancy had thrown him out of her 83rd story penthouse, and he'd fallen to his deserved death. The coroner said he must have flown 100 yards before falling. And while they fully supported her, she was arrested and spent 7 months in prison. Samurai tried to stay together, but being on a hiatus for so long affected the band. They were split and had already begun going off in their own creative directions. Henry stopped playing bass after working on some tech that fried his brains. His nervous system was shot and he became disabled, losing most of his motor skills. Nancy got out of prison and changed her name to Bess Isis and went back to her life of journalism. Denny went on to join a new band called Mastermind, and Carrie began his solo career. DMS, Diverse Media System, offered Carrie and Johnny a deal after Samurai disbanded. But Universal, Samurai's original label, decided they could sell Johnny and Carrie as a package deal. At the time, the two were in very high demand, especially Johnny. So DMS retaliated at being rejected, desperate to sign them. Angered by them potentially taking a deal with Universal and not DMS, Carrie and Johnny started being harassed by DMS thugs. They tried physical intimidation and then threatened Carrie and Johnny with governmental investigations and other forms of intimidation. DMS even threatened to reveal Johnny's true identity as a deserter of the second conflict. But of course, this only encouraged Johnny. Ignoring these, Carrie and Johnny went on to start their new careers, happy with their decision to join Universal again. Johnny would release his first solo album in 2009, Sins of Your Brothers, where he directly admitted that he was a deserter. His songs provided insight into the true events of what happened during the war and what the military was doing. He also exposed the experimental cybernetics program that many soldiers and Marines were being forced to go through. This look into the war changed how people viewed it. The albums triggered a national amnesty program for AWOL Central and South American war veterans, after the outpouring of sympathy for the deserters. Johnny and Carrie became brothers in fame as solo acts, and while it wasn't originally part of the deal, Johnny and Carrie often toured together, becoming virtually inseparable. Their Samurai past gave them deals only usually offered to major bands or superstars, and the two being together worked out, as they shared the same beliefs and past. Johnny would also use his fame to continue to spread his anti-corporation and anti-government message. The two also shared top billing for their tours, switching off every night, and even appeared as guests on each other's albums. And while Carey loved the fame, he thought Johnny was disgusted by it. Even still, the two had found a system that worked for them. Carey had even spoken with Johnny about their shared experiences during the second conflict, and was going to write an album about it, which he would later do. This album would both recount the events that Carey experienced during his time of war, but also would tell a tale of a tumultuous friendship with Johnny. Whatever happened between the two, Carey would never say anything actually bad about Johnny, and would deny being jealous of him. With the two focusing on their solo careers, a lot of people stepped in to try and fill the void that Samurai left. They also wanted to follow in the footsteps of Johnny himself. When asked if the attention and wannabe Samurai bands bothered Johnny, he said it bothered him a little bit, but it's also flattering. Sometime around 2010, Johnny would get into an altercation with an Arasaka executive. The two were fighting over a parking space, and Johnny would get into the Arasaka executive's face and would end up shooting the guy's tires out. This would be the 911 Porsche Johnny would later own, and the executive ended up being Toshiro Harada. Years later, he'd go on to steal it and customize it to his own liking. At this time, Johnny was still speaking out against corporations, fueling his Arasaka hatred even more, and using his platform to try and enact change after several years of going solo. During this time, he was also seeing Rogue Amenadiera's off and on, and the two spent lots of time in his iconic Porsche. There's even pictures of Johnny, Rogue, and Carey in her room that she still keeps out 50 years later. Alongside the picture of the three, there's a picture of Johnny, Rogue, and Maximum Mike from a night at the Old Atlantis, their favorite bar. Johnny was drunk and high off of synth coke, and Maximum Mike was propping him up because of it. It isn't known when Rogue and Johnny started dating or for how long, but after finding out that Johnny had been cheating on her with multiple women, the two would break up in 2011. This was the last pic of the three of them together. Rogue would go on to date Maximum Mike on and off after Johnny, when she was still hurting from Johnny's betrayal. But eventually, the two stopped talking. At some point, Johnny was also in a relationship with Alt, although the timeline is unclear, but it seems to be shortly after his time with Rogue. In 2012, Johnny and Carey would purchase the Grand Illusion, one of the hottest rock clubs on the West Coast. Many big artists got their start here, and Johnny and Carey silently purchased it, keeping their names unattached. They even started an open mic night on Thursdays, where a Universal Records executive would go look every week for new talent. The club itself also had strict rules to prioritize the music. All weapons must be checked at the door, and everyone is scanned as they enter. When leaving, weapons are returned, but the anti-weapons rules were really important to Johnny and Carey. They were working towards starting a dream of a non-violent future, and the club was just the beginning of that. He was at the top of his game, spreading his anti-corporation message at each and every show, and he and Carey's working relationship was working. He was also in a messy, on-again and off-again relationship with Alt, and had begun to let his guard down. On the night of April 16, 2013, Johnny had just performed at the Hammer and had just reconnected with Alt. The two had been arguing, and when Alt stormed out, Johnny followed her down a dark back street, and three men approached them. Johnny waved them off as simply fans wanting more after the show, but quickly realized a little too late that that wasn't the case. Within seconds, the men shoot Johnny and rip into him, nearly killing him. And while Johnny is down, they grab Alt. Johnny fades into darkness, about to die. When he comes to, he's laying in a pool of his own blood, on the dirty street looking up at the sky. A cat inspects Johnny's body and then leaves him to die. Mustering up the strength to pick himself up, he balls his chrome hand into a fist and thrusts it into his stomach. The pain gives him a burst of energy. He gets to his feet and decides he's not going to die. Whoever did this will. As he loses his balance and almost falls into traffic, A hand stops him. When Johnny wakes up, he realizes he's missed the ambulance ride, but wakes up in a familiar place. The same doctor who did his chrome from the war is fixing him once again. Milt Nauman is like a father to Johnny. Nauman had a son who also served in the same company as Johnny in the war. And his son was Johnny's best friend, who was killed during the Second Central American War in 2005. Because of their friendship, Johnny is like a son to Nauman, and he wishes Johnny would stop doing this, having just fixed him up 2 weeks prior. Thompson was the one who saved Johnny, watching him and Alt from afar. He tells Johnny that their business was with Alt, not him. Alt was their ITS pet netrunner. She handled security and made a lot of their software, including the original Soul Killer. Thompson knew that Arasaka would need Alt for their new Soul Killer 2.0, so he'd been following her. So Johnny and Thompson go after Alt, but with a stop beforehand. Johnny and Rogue hadn't seen each other in 2 years at this point. Rogue isn't very happy about the reunion, but her partner, Santiago, agrees to take the job for a lot of eddies. Their meeting is interrupted by 2 solos, who track them from Thompson's trauma card. But the 3 of them make quick work of the solos. As they leave the bar, an AV-4 tracks them, and Thompson uses his grenade launcher to take it out. Instead of taking Johnny's Porsche to avoid another ambush, the 4 set out on foot, with Santiago at the head and Johnny at the rear. 2 hours later, Johnny, Rogue, Santiago, and Thompson have escaped, and made their way to a fire escape 200 feet in the air. Deciding they need to move, they lay low at the Mark Luxor Hilton Hotel. Realizing that they'll have to attack Arasaka straight on, they realize they know just how to do it. So they begin preparing for the assault. Rogue leaves the hotel and picks up explosives, flash bombs, timers, and tripwires. Santiago picks up more explosives, a combat assault cyber deck, and a bulky sniper rifle. Johnny and Thompson are also planning, setting up and spreading word of their party right outside Arasaka HQ. During all of this, Alt wakes up with cotton wool in her mouth. She pretends to be out while she assesses her situation. Luckily, she is mostly unharmed and is still clothed, so she spits out the gag and looks around. 2 men are in the room with her, Toshiro and Akira. They allow her to drink water and tell her that she's their new associate. Alt, knowing how to play the game, simply agrees, and thus begins her work with Soul Killer, knowing full well that once she creates it, they will put her into it. The clock continues to tick as the team plans their attack. In a few hours, they have everything they need, and the fans begin to pile up right outside Arasaka HQ. Seicho Harada, second in command of Arasaka Security, watches as 6,000 rabid fans pile in. Realizing he can do nothing about the situation, he watches as Johnny Silverhand sets them up. Security continues to gather, waiting to pounce on the fans as their excitement continues to grow as Johnny sings. Johnny is performing Chippin' In without the rest of Samurai. Santiago, Rogue, and Thompson get in position while Johnny sets the distraction. He jumps off stage, pushes through the crowd, and as the security tenses and continues to build, Rogue and Thompson see their way in. One of the security guards finally loses his nerve and shoots his gun into the air. But by this time, Johnny, Thompson, and Rogue are already in the building. Santiago takes out some guards as the entire crowd squeezes into the lower floors. And with Thompson and Rogue wearing Iron Sights jackets, they blend right in with the rest of the fans. Rogue places the first explosive in an elevator and sends it up to the executive offices. Shortly after, Johnny joins her, wearing Seicho Harada's Arasaka Company jacket. In total, 18 people die at this concert. While Johnny and the crew are entering the building, Alt is still diving the net, programming for Arasaka. But Akira and Toshiro have realized that Johnny has raised an army against them, and they need to act fast. But their only concern is the program, not Alt or her body. By this time, the team has made it further into the building, and on floor 6, Johnny and Thompson make their way to the elevator, pry the doors open, and jump on the elevator car on floor 5. Thompson hotwires the motor, and they start their ascent. As Rogue continues up the building, she hears the bombs going off, collapsing the stairwell and stopping anyone from following her below. As they set off their explosives, Akira begins to feel the urgency. Willing to leave Alt behind, he jacks into her cyberdeck, tests the program on her, and in doing so, rips her mind from her body. As she is soul-killed, she finds the 3 Arasaka Guardian netrunners and fries their minds, letting their bodies drop. Alt had already planned for this. She begins going through information and burns Akira's cyber optics. She strips the memory of data, deletes it, and then uploads it to her hidden files. She steals $20 million, having Toshiro's digital signature sign it. And then she takes control of the room, seeing herself in the monitors. Akira notices, but before he can do anything about it, she cuts him in 2 with the room's lasers. She speaks to Toshiro through the interface, warning not to move as she begins to transfer herself back to her body. But right as she is about to return, the room lurches as the explosives go off. The movement causes Toshiro to throw himself, toppling the cyberdeck, unplugging Alt in the process and breaking her connection with herself. Right as this happens, Johnny, Rogue, and Thompson make it into the room. But Alt is already gone. Johnny stares at her almost lifeless body as Thompson films everything. His silver-armed the hand takes over and shoots Toshiro in the head. Johnny, thinking Alt is dead, grabs her body and walks away, all while she screams at him on the other side of the monitors. Sometime after this, Alt would contact Johnny, telling him not to come after her, that enough people died for nothing. After Alt's death, Johnny would go on to write Never Fade Away, a song dedicated to her, on his solo album A Cool Metal Fire. Originally, this was a solo song, but it would be released again later on his album titled Never Fade Away, and then again with Samurai. After this failed attempt to save Alt, Johnny, Rogue, Santiago, and Thompson would all go into hiding, with the help of the Aldecaldo clan. From here, they would leave Night City and they'd spend 2 years with them. During this time, Santiago became the new leader of the Aldecaldos, becoming Santiago Aldecaldo. In 2015, everyone but Santiago returns to Night City. And upon returning, Johnny picked up right where he left off, playing a free benefit concert in Lake Park. Here, he would use his concert to bring attention to the brutal methods that the NCPD was using in the 2014 homeless riots. There had been a park bandstand to commemorate the death of Richard Knight that was destroyed during the homeless riots and was rebuilt soon afterwards. Here is where Johnny would set up his benefit show. Johnny speaking up for the homeless made The Pack, a homeless nomad group, see him as one of them, and sometimes he would even come to help them if they needed it. He also indirectly helped others, with one such person being Samantha Stevens. Around 2015, there was a fire in one of Johnny's studios, where a full Borg firefighter, Samantha Stevens, was the one to rescue him. At the time, Borgs weren't really accepted because of fears of cyberpsychosis. During an interview, though, Johnny recounted his story of being saved from his burning studio by Samantha Stevens, and this helped soften the Borg image. At some point, Johnny would also have a personal gun commissioned, his Malorian Arms 3516. Alongside Johnny's iconic and unique Porsche, he demanded only the best, and that was the Malorian. At the time, it was the most powerful handgun on the market. Johnny specified what he wanted, saying, "I wanted something that would drop a cyberpsychoed fan at 100 paces, no matter how metaled up he was. Price was no object." This unique gun can also only work with an arm like Johnny's. Over the years, he'd have different Malorians upgrading with each one, and his last one was as powerful as an anti-tank gun. His Malorian and his silver arm would begin to merge, both becoming the hand, and both feeding the voice in Johnny's mind, telling him to act when needed. Despite Johnny being a functioning cyberpsycho, he spent the next several years in the public, performing solo shows and continuing to spread his anti-corporation message once again. 2020 is a little hazy with conflicting reports. There were rumors of a samurai reunion tour, but the only evidence is a single t-shirt, and rumor is that this was a gag t-shirt made by Johnny, with unrealistic dates of samurai's appearances, because at the time, samurai wouldn't have even been able to get an arena gig in the States. So a world tour was very unrealistic. Samurai does have songs listed that were re-recorded samurai songs, but if the band didn't actually reunite, these may have just been Johnny releasing songs under the samurai name. Around 2020, Johnny gave an interview where he remembers falling for a girl that he still thinks about. He reminisces about her eyes and how beautiful she was, even though he didn't care how much of her was real or not. But even after all this time, Johnny was also still thinking about Alt, who at this point had been gone for 10 years. On August 20th, 2023, Johnny's old friend Thompson discovers that Arasaka has amassed a huge uncontaminated database that will make it close to all-powerful in the wake of Bartmoss's wreck of the net. So, an assault on Arasaka and their database was organized and being backed by Militech. Morgan Blackhand would be hired by Militech to make sure the job goes smoothly and to blow up the Arasaka towers with a mini nuke, intending to officially end the Fourth Corporate War and destroy the database. And while this was an Arasaka hit job, for Johnny, his main objective was to find Alt. Hitting Arasaka was just a bonus. Alongside Morgan's team, Johnny, Rogue, Shaitan, Thompson, and Spider Murphy were also hired for the job. During the war, high-ranking individuals were being found jacked into the net, with their minds completely blank. Some of the victims were congressmen, state senators, and Militech stockholders. They realized that they were being soul-killed. Blackhand and his team were summoned by General Patrick Addington, commander of the American and Militech forces around Night City. Addington tells them that Arasaka is developing a more powerful version of Soul Killer, and it can attack multiple targets at once. And to make matters worse, they have Alt captured and stored, forcing her to work on the program. Johnny leads Strike Team Alpha, consisting of Johnny, Spider Murphy, Rogue, Thompson, and Shaitan, and a small number of Militech soldiers and solos, and a group of Aldecaldos known as the Lobos. Team Alpha is tasked with infiltrating the building to get to the Soul Killer lab on the 120th floor. They are also to rescue Alt and destroy the Soul Killer program, any backups, and the entire lab. They have a firebomb carried by one of the solos, but what they don't know is that Strike Team Alpha is a decoy team, with Morgan Blackhand's real objective being the main reason for the operation. Morgan's team, Strike Team Omega, is comprised of him and the best of the best that he's hired. They will lead a full-fledged attack on the tower when they get the go-ahead from the president. They are to provide a distraction so the other team can get in and out, and then they are also to do their secret mission. It is unknown exactly how they get into the building, but they are successful, and they immediately get to work. Spider Murphy bypasses the door to the lab with the help of Shaitan, and when they get it open, Shaitan goes first. Spider gets to work on the computers, and here she contacts Alt. As Spider dumps Alt into the memory core, she releases a recursive virus to wipe out all mentions of the Soul Killer program. And during this, Johnny asks if Alt is okay. He's nervous, antsy, and clearly worried about Alt. Spider continues her work, and Johnny goes and joins Thompson. Unfortunately, downloading Alt takes longer than they have, and while they're waiting, Atom Smasher interrupts them. Spider, Johnny, Shaitan, Thompson, and Rogue all try to hide from Smasher, and his machine gun and shotgun. Rogue fires her rifles and then fires 2 grenades. Shaitan fires off blast after blast. Somewhere, Thompson screams out in pain. It's a mess. Bullets are flying everywhere, and in the chaos, Spider is forced to make a decision. She links her cyberdeck to the suitcase she's holding that has Alt downloaded. She quickly connects to the net and drags the pin icons that represent Alt's personality, memories, and whatever else makes her her. She takes all of Alt and virtually tosses her into the net, scattering the various bits of Alt, tagging them with the marker in hopes of retrieving them someday. As Spider is freeing Alt, Johnny realizes the situation that they're in. He doesn't want to leave Alt again. He won't abandon her this time. His hand also talks to him. Better to burn out, it says, and Johnny agrees. Spider and Rogue are trying to fight Smasher and the Arasaka soldiers, but they are under heavy fire and probably won't make it. So Johnny causes a distraction so that they can escape. "Hey, Steelhead, let's rock and roll," he yells, as he jumps out in the middle of the gunfire. He's got a Militech SMG in one hand and a Malorian in the other. He tries to take down Smasher, who is astonished at the sheer audacity of the rocker boy, who stands in front of him shooting him with weapons that won't even dent his armor. Smasher signals the auto shotgun and it opens fire on Johnny, ripping him in half. Johnny spins and falls to the ground, a surprised look on his face. The Malorian is still smoking in his fist. Johnny dies, but this second of distraction was all that the team needed. Shaitan, Rogue, and Spider all move, taking down the Arasaka soldiers, and Adam lurches in Shaitan's grip as he grabs a hold of the back of his armor. Now Shaitan is a distraction. As he grapples with Smasher, Rogue, Spider, and an injured Thompson go to make their exit. But in a last desperate attempt, Spider reaches for Johnny's mangled form. This is the moment Spider inserts Soul Killer on Johnny. As Rogue watches in horror trying to get them out of there, Spider reaches into her jacket. She pulls out the data slug Alt downloaded to her long ago. It's surprisingly heavy. She whispers, "Sorry, Johnny," as she rams it home into the back of the dying rocker's skull. Then she turns, reaches out for the data suitcase, but sees that it too has been ravaged by gunfire. It's wrecked. 2 friends down in as many minutes. She quietly wishes Alt good luck. She also swears that Johnny will be avenged. Rogue and Spider drag Thompson to the elevator and they escape. At this point, Johnny is dead. He doesn't make it to the rooftop to see what continues to happen. And what is actually seen is only seen by one person. One of the Lobos that Santiago sent to help with the mission said that Johnny's team was carrying a large and heavy suitcase, the nuke. And during the fight against Smasher and the Arasaka soldiers, Morgan was nowhere in sight. He had taken off with the suitcase and headed down the stairwell. He wasn't seen again until he was on the roof. Outside on the rooftop, Morgan and his team are at work when Smasher, who at this point had already taken down Shaitan, drops down ready to duel. Smasher had been challenging Morgan for years. In Smasher's mind, Morgan Blackhand is his nemesis, and one he must best. In Blackhand's mind, Smasher is nothing more than a nuisance, and he doesn't care about him at all. Smasher waves Shaitan's biopod and what remains of him in front of Blackhand, taunting him. As Smasher taunts Blackhand with Johnny's death as well and Shaitan's biopod, Blackhand tells the rest of his team to leave. Here, Blackhand and Smasher finally have their duel, but the building begins to fall apart from the explosions, and Smasher and Blackhand are lost in the rubble. And after this, Morgan Blackhand wouldn't be seen again. After the bombing, Samantha Stevens, the Borg firefighter, who had saved Johnny back in 2015, would go into the hot zone, retrieving Johnny's body for her friend Angel. There, she found both Johnny and an unexploded Arasaka nuke. Realizing how dangerous it was, she dumped it into the Del Coronado Bay and hid Johnny's body inside the nuke crate to preserve what was left of the man who had been split in 2. She also found Johnny's belongings, one of his Malorian 3516 guns and his Porsche. She would go on to take care of both Johnny's body and his belongings for roughly 15 years afterwards, storing them in her own garage. She kept the Porsche in cold storage to keep it in pristine condition, and she used Cosmoline on the Malorian to keep it functional. She also had one of Johnny's songs. Before the raid on Arasaka in 2023, Johnny was recording a new song in one of his studios, which was planned to be credited under the name Samurai. Unfortunately, the song was never released and was thought to be destroyed in the Night City Holocaust. This song was Black Dog, and fortunately, 2 copies survived. One was a pirated data link sampled from an actual recording session, but most of the song was missing. The sample eventually was found by rocker boy Lilia, who tried to find the entire song. Unable to find it, she puts it out in the data pool and hopes that she can find more information. Surprisingly, a woman contacts her about the song, Samantha Stevens. When Lilia meets up with Samantha, Samantha presents the data chip with the song on it, telling them that someone was there that night after the club was closed. They grabbed a sample before the bouncers threw them out. So what Lilia has is this small bit. But what Samantha has is the complete song recorded in his own voice. The chip was recorded by Johnny just before his disappearance in 2023. But it had been damaged by an EMP blast, radiation. Johnny kept his music stored within his silver arm, so any tracks pulled from it would have been damaged by the blast. So while the whole song is on it, some of it is garbled like an encryption. She made a copy of it and still has the original, but Lilia can have it under one condition. They have to bring this large wooden crate to New Mexico, specifically a place called Los Alamos Labs. Samantha hires the team to transport it, telling them not to open it or to even try, because even she can't open it. Lilia and her team agree. And while they're heading out, Samantha presses Johnny's gun into Combi Zara's hand, saying that she should take it, and that Johnny isn't ever going to use it again, so she's the right person to carry it for him. Zara would later go on to use the gun, feeling the lingering hunger of it. The gun had been interfaced with Johnny and his arm for so long that the gun itself had a bit of cyberpsychosis, affecting whoever wielded it. Their journey trying to deliver the package was rough. They are targeted, and after realizing how coveted their package is, they take a moment to inspect it. Trace Santiago speculates that it's Johnny Silverhand in the crate. He says it makes sense. Samantha was a firefighter, a pararescue before the war. She would have been the first into the wreckage after the nuke went off. She already had a history with him after saving him from his studio fire in 2015. And she's a Silverhand fangirl. No one knows where Silverhand went after the night of the bombing. Rumors were that he was working on a big job with his old mates, a hit on Arasaka. So Trace thinks she got his body and put him on ice. Despite Samantha's warning, they open it. When they open it, there's an 8 by 4 foot long, wide, high-vis gray cylinder, shaped like a torpedo. It's covered in numbers, letters, and Japanese. And in the center is a huge yellow and black radioactive warning trefoil. Instead of seeing Johnny in the box, it's a nuke. Arasaka had been trailing them this entire time, and when they finally catch up to them, out jumps Michiko Arasaka. She reveals that Arasaka had planted their own bomb in their own towers, just in case. This was that bomb. They had originally decided to leave it where it was, but when Arasaka realized it was missing, they realized that only someone very strong would have been able to move it. So they traced the radiation and found that the bomb had been hidden in the basement of a nearby garage, owned by Samantha Stevens. Little do they know that by this time, their nuke is already in the bottom of the bay. Kei Arasaka died before giving further instructions, so they decided to leave the bomb in the garage for 15 years, believing it was safe. Michiko explains the story and asks for the nuke back. Instead, she ends up helping escort them to the labs, where she believes the nuke will be disarmed. When they finally make it to the labs, it is deserted, abandoned for at least a decade. They're supposed to wait for someone to pick it up. And finally, out of the building steps a blonde woman covered in battered work clothes. Angel. Angel is tall and ethereally beautiful, and seems to reflect a life of hardship and pain. A large tech tool belt hangs around her waist. As payment, she gives them a cash chip with a lot of eddies on it. And more surprisingly, Angel asks about the song Samantha helped Lilia get, and then hands them a second data chip, a new recording of the full Black Dog song, made from the original studio session. With that, Angel and the crate are gone. Afterwards, Angel calls Samantha, who tells her that she's dying, cancer. All the radiation from moving Johnny's body has finally hit her spinal cord. Samantha reveals that she promised Angel she'd get her Johnny's body, and that she'd been looking for the right people, which is why she chose Lilia, a person desperately searching for Johnny's final song. Angel hangs up and opens the case. She looks tenderly down at the dark frozen face behind its masking curtain of ice. "Hello, my love," she says. And this is the last known location of Johnny's body. After 2045, it's unknown what happened to Johnny's body or Alt. But his belongings would continue their journey without him. Zara would get Johnny's Malorian, and Atom Smasher would find Johnny's belongings in Samantha's garage, with Arasaka having known the whole time the location. Saburo tasked Smasher with taking care of Johnny's body, but by the time Atom would have found it, it had already made its way to Angel. With no body, Smasher still found Johnny's Porsche, though it is unknown how Smasher got Johnny's Malorian, considering after 2038, it should have been with Zara. However Smasher got it, he gave it to Grayson for a job well done, which is how it ends up back with V, same as Johnny's Porsche. It's unclear how exactly Johnny's engram ended up in Arasaka's hands, but it would be Yorinobu who would steal the relic prototype from one of his father's labs in Tokyo, with the intent to sell it to Netwatch. Through an email exchange, we see that Netwatch just wanted a sample biochip with a valid engram, and they were confused why Yorinobu specified that it would be Johnny Silverhand's. Netwatch just wanted a relic. It being Johnny's may have been a bonus if they were intending to contact Alt, like everyone theorizes, but ultimately, and most likely, we know, Yorinobu was trying to destroy Arasaka from the inside, and what better way to piss off dear old dad than taking his key to immortality and giving it to the terrorist that hates everything Saburo stands for. So the question is, how did Arasaka get Johnny's engram? Did Smasher find Johnny's body after 2045? After Alt had it? That seems unlikely, but he did find Samantha's garage with his car, and somehow ended up with Johnny's Malorian, though Johnny did have multiple guns, so it could be a different one. Did someone get to Johnny's engram before Samantha found his body? If so, how would they even know to look for it? However it ended up in Arasaka's hands, it did. And only after Johnny's time within Mikoshi is when we meet him. Which brings us to Johnny's journey with V. In my next video, I'll be doing a full breakdown of Johnny and V and their dynamic, as well as a full analysis on Johnny Silverhand. But I did want to include some extra details that I did find about Johnny but just didn't know where to put within the timeline. First is that the original Johnny was designed after David Bowie and a tiny bit of Bryan Adams, and you can see this original design in game several times. Like Bowie, the original Johnny was also blonde, and Pondsmith added a small conversation with Spider Murphy and Johnny that addresses Johnny's change of hair. Whether this is confirmation of Johnny's hair being dyed is up in the air for me though, because why would he dye his entire body? including his armpit hair. Seems a little odd, but Johnny is kind of crazy, so maybe the Johnny that we meet really should be blonde. Johnny also had a beach house in Coast View. I think a lot of people don't realize that Johnny had money, a lot of it. And apparently he had several houses. Lastly, the relationship between Johnny and Rogue is intentionally toxic. It's based off of a couple that Pondsmith knew when he was younger, and he wishes that the two would just break up. Also, the story of Black Dog takes place in both 2038 and 2045, so I'm unsure which one is accurate. I did reference both when I was retelling that story, but again, I'm not sure if this was an error or if it is supposed to be one or the other. This was a fun dive into everything I could find out about Johnny Silverhand. I read every source book that mentioned his name, listened to every interview, and tried to remember every moment in game where Johnny reveals just a little bit about him or his life. But if I miss anything, please let me know. This video is actually part 1 of my Johnny Silverhand analysis, which is going to be a very long video. There are a lot of inconsistencies about what actually happened versus what Johnny tells us happened in 2077. My next video will be a breakdown of what those differences were and what they tell us about Johnny. I want to go into who he was and who he became as an engram. And I also really want to explore the tragedy of Johnny Silverhand. So that will be my next video. If you're interested in more like this or want to hear my Johnny analysis, make sure to subscribe for more upcoming Cyberpunk 2077 content. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thank you for watching. This was a very long video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my channel members. Thank you to my Patreon members. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I will see you next time.